Hello everybody and welcome back to another Triple Crown Wargaming video with me, the Oracle, and today we are talking about the most recent Old World Almanac. Now this may very well be the last Old World Almanac that we see as we are ever approaching the end of the year and the fabled early release in 2024, but today we are talking about your army's selection composition, and specifically the Grand Army of Bretonnia, as has been shown off in the article. Now, I'm going to assume that a lot of these are going to be relatively, well, a lot of the mentions are going to be relatively common across all of the armies. But for now, obviously, this is going to be relatively specific for Bretonnia in a lot of its cases. But really, what we're looking at initially is going to be the army composition. Now, the article itself talks about building armies. It talks about, obviously, you can play in different sizes. But it does specifically mention that 2,000 points per side will make for a substantial 2 to 3 hour game, perhaps involving 100 or more models each. Now, that to me would be my assumption that the 2,000 point game is going to be the standard size of game that we're going to see in the old world. Obviously that could change, don't know that for certain, but I think it's probably relatively safe to bet that 2,000 points will be the standard. Obviously thinking back to when 8th edition came out, initially the game was 2,000 points. That was your pretty standardised size of army. It certainly was for all the Warhammer World events, Throne of Skulls and things like that, and for lots of tournaments on the scene, as it were. They also were 2,000 points. The game slowly progressed forward. I mean, obviously ourselves, we always initially ran 2,000 points, but it slowly moved on to 2,400, and then we pretty much settled on 2,500 as the general points for all of our events. Now, the game may move forward like that. As it moves forward, we don't know, but as it stands at the minute, I think 2,000 points is probably a good bet as to what an average game size is going to be. But perhaps involving 100 or more models each, that seems like a lot. Doesn't seem like a lot if you're Tomb Kings, because undead generally, you have a lot of those things anyway. But 100 Bretonnian models seems wild for 2,000 points. But I suppose until we fully see points, we don't know exactly what we're going to be looking at. But they've initially posted what army composition lists look like. Now they've broken them down into six different things. So you've initially got characters. Now it would appear that the game is going to have a characters slot rather than lords and heroes like it did in 8th edition. So what we've effectively been given is 50% in characters. We'll get to the percentage later. What we've been given is 50% in characters. Now, that's obviously the same as what we had in the end times. We had 50% in the Lords and Heroes slot. So 50% in characters. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think it's quite an interesting change, because what you initially obviously have with, sometimes when you were playing 8th, for example, you'd look at it and go, oh, I wish I could just squeeze a few more points in the Lord slot. Not looking to necessarily abuse the cap, but having a little extra was always nice. But to be able to just have that generically now, I think it's going to change the game. But there are some restrictions with things that go forward that I think won't just mean that you see 50% in what would equivalent be Lords and then no heroes. But we'll get back to that. Obviously you've then got core troops, relatively standard. Special and rare, same as they always were in 8th edition. In two types of the army comps. And then finally we have mention to what wasn't really available in standard 8th edition, and is very I'm going to say the buzzword, very interesting to see come back, and that is mercenaries and allies. Now someone in the comments, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you did used to be able to take mercenaries and allies in previous editions of the game. It was only really 8th that you couldn't, excluding obviously things like Scrolls of Binding from Storm of Magic, or from Monstrous Arcanum, Tamakan, things like that. But generically in the game, in the generic core rulebook, you couldn't take allies or mercenaries. So that's quite a big change, and it's going to be interesting to see what mercenaries are. Now obviously later in the article, we will get to it. Later in the article we get a bit of a breakdown as to what allies look like specifically for Bretonnia. but this mercenaries, there isn't any mention to mercenaries at all. So that's going to be something I'm quite excited to see what the list of mercenaries are, whether certain armies have access to certain mercenaries or whether mercenaries are just generic across the entire board. But that's going to be one that I'm looking forward to. Now they have mentioned that every army upon release will have a grand. Every faction, will upon release have a grand army. Now it does caveat at the end of the article, that even factions that are getting a PDF list, so none of the initial supported lists as they were in inverted commas, so everybody is going to be getting a grand army composition of list. Now that's quite good. I think that's a good thing, because I think that will mean that everyone is still going to be in line from an initial release point. And they then go on to talk about what the Kingdom of Bretonnia's Grand Army composition is. Now, you get 50% in characters, as I mentioned before. At least 25% of your army has to be spent on core. Now, that's the same as it was in 8th edition. And yeah, I mean, I'm not. That's cool. That's cool. That's come back. Makes sense. We've then got up to 50% in special, which again is the same as it was in 8th edition, up to 25% in rare, which similar thing to as it was in 8th edition. But crucially in 8th edition, depending on the army size you was at, you could only take 2 of a rare choice. Now there doesn't seem to be, in the Kingdom of Bretonnia Grand Army competition, there doesn't seem to be any cap on the amount of things that you can take, excluding points caps. So it mentions that up to 25% of your army may be taken or may be spent upon Growel Knights, or 0 to 1 field trebuchets per 1,000 points. So I wonder if that's rounding up or rounding down, or if it's a core 3,000 points. So a core 1,000 points. So for example, if you play 2,999 points, can you only take two trebuchets? Now, thinking about how Grand Armies worked in 8th edition, I would suggest that it probably actually is based on each 1,000 points at core value, not at a round up or round down. So at 2,000 points, you can have up to 2 trebuchets and Growel Knights. So that's again, is a slight change, but what it doesn't mean is that, I suppose technically what it could mean is that you could just go just 4 units of 3 Growel Knights, just 4 little darts running around, which would be quite an interesting choice. I'm not sure how competitive that would be, but it does mention below that you can take 2 units of 6 Growel Knights in a 2,000 point army. So yeah, you could technically take 4 units of 3 Growel Knights, because we saw in last week's article they're a minimum of 3. So you could have little Growel Knight darts running around, which would be quite interesting. But I think you'd probably see big units. But I digress. Then there's these mention to mercenaries. It says up to 20% of your army's points value may be spent on mercenaries. There's no mention to the mercenaries, the lists, or anything like that. So that's the big one for me. I would very much like to see what mercenaries entail, how competitive they are, whether they're worth taking, whether they're just there for the rule of cool. I think there certainly is going to be a want to take mercenaries, or they just wouldn't be there if there wasn't. But I'm excited to see how that's going to look like, because mercenaries is quite cool. I think it also adds a really cool opportunity for you to be able to have some really good hobby, in terms of, for example, if you could take with Bretonnian, I don't know, let's say you can take ogres as mercenaries. You could, if you wanted to, I suppose, convert those ogres up to look like they fit in the Bretonnian army, paint them in a Bretonnian colour scheme, give them Bretonnian conversions, things like that. I think mercenaries and allies in general, maybe not so much allies, but more so much mercenaries. But I think those as a combination can see some very cool potential hobby, which is, yeah, I think there's a couple of guys I know that do some fantastic work on their armies, and I'd be very excited to see what their take on mercenaries were and how they would do it. But then finally, you can take up to 25% of your army's points values on a single allied contingent drawn from any Kingdom of Bretonnia Army of Infamy composition list. Now, excuse me, we don't know what the Army of Army of Infamies are. There is mention to them later in the article, so we'll pick that back up. But for now, we don't know what they are. So that's going to be cool to see what those lists look like and what an Army of Infamy is. And then similarly, we also have mention to one of the following Grand Army composition lists. So you can take a unit up to 25% from Dwarven Mountain Holds, Empire of Man, High Elf Realms, and Wood Elf Realms. Now, it is caveated that Dwarven Mountain Holds and Wood Elf Realms are suspicious allies. Now, at a guess, I'd probably say suspicious means something like they can't use your Lord's Inspiring Presence if that's a thing in this game, or they can't use Battle Standard Bearers rerolls, or any sort of army-wide special rules would probably not apply to suspicious allies, would be my assumption. But yeah, that's going to be quite cool. I assume obviously that list is going to change between factions and armies, so it'd be quite cool to see what sort of combination of armies you can take. But I'm also quite pleased to see that it's up to 25% spent on a single allied contingent. Is a single allied contingent one unit, or is it like a set of models? So I'll take 3 units that are 25% from dwarves, let's say. So could you just put Dwarven artillery into a Bretonnian army as allies? That's I'm gonna say it again, it's an interesting but also a scary prospect. I mean, is allies going to allow you to potentially bring in bonuses where your list suffers? If, for example, you was running, let's say, High Elves or High Elf Realms, as they're known. If you're running High Elf Realms and you have no artillery, could I ally in Bretonnia and give myself 2 trebuchets in a High Elf list? That seems very competitive to me. I wonder how that's going to work and how potentially abusable that is, if it is. But yeah, I mean, that's going to be one that to look out for. I think allies and mercenaries, I think, is going to be a hot topic from this one. But something I probably should have mentioned at the beginning is obviously that in these Grand Army compositions, there's specific amounts of units that you can take or must take. Now, obviously, I know I mentioned it with the trebuchet, but that's pretty much across the board for every section of selection. So we'll start with characters. Up to 50% of your army's points may be spent on 0 to 1 dukes. Now, obviously, that, to me, that does make sense. You probably wouldn't really. When would you see two dukes on a battlefield at one time? In like a, you're probably rarely going to see that. You're talking about the end times, which I hope we're a very, very long way away from. But so to me, I don't necessarily feel that bad about that one. It also mentions that there's 0 to 1 barons or prophetesses per 1,000 points. So again, same as the trebuchet. What it does mean is that you're not just going to see 3 or 4 really high, like an army that's just captained by like 4 level 4 wizards. Which I'm not necessarily against that. To be honest, I think that makes sense to me. But what is strange is that you can take 0 to 1 baron or prophetess. So you can't run a duke, a baron, and a prophetess. You have to, if you want to take that baron for the second, for the combat punch, you have to then can only have damsels rather than. Oh, maybe I'm reading that wrong. You tell me what you think. I think that, to me, that 0 to 1 baron or prophetess would suggest that you can have 1 baron or 1 prophetess, not one of each. But yeah, I mean, again, tell me if you think I'm wrong on that one. That's going to be quite a point of contention for some people, I think, because if you want to have that blend of combat and high level magic, you may well be forced to take a duke and a prophetess rather than a baron and a prophetess to however you want to pull your points around. But it is per 1,000 points. So I suppose at 2,000 points you could take a baron and a prophetess. So it's not too bad. And then finally, paladins, damsels, and sergeants at arms can be taken with wanton abandon in your character's point. You can take as many of those as you like. So we do go through the stat line later of dukes, barons, and paladins. So you may want to take multiple paladins because they do seem like they're going to be pretty good. But for now, we're going to move on to core. So at least 25% of your army's points must be spent on core. Fair enough, as it always was. Now here is the change though. In a Kingdom of Bretonnia Grand Army composition, you have to take at least 1 unit of Knights of the Realm on foot or mounted Knights of the Realm. You also have to take at least 1 unit of Men-at-Arms or Peasant Bowmen, and then 0 to 1 units of Knights Errant per unit of Knights of the Realm. So if you take 3 units of Knights of the Realm, you can take 3 units of Knights Errant, and vice versa. Obviously, if you're going on foot, you can also take Knights of the Realm. But it's the caps and the minimums is something that is obviously new. Now we saw something relatively similar to this in the end times when we had the army specific. There was some armies that were in some of the later books, certainly in the Thanquol book and Thanquol and Archeon. There might have been some in Kane. There might be some in all the books, to be fair. I can't really remember. But the one that always sticks out in my head is the Thanquol book. Obviously, because I collect Lizardmen and Skaven, there was lots of armies in there for them. Now, we saw a similar thing in that where if you wanted to take these armies and gain the specific bonus of these story-driven armies as they were, you had to take specific amounts of units. And we've done similar things in our narrative events, where if you want the bonus of the special of the new special character, then you have to take specific lists, as it were. So it's interesting to see that as your general army composition is that you have to take specifics. But I think, to be fair, most armies will see those things anyway. I mean, what Bretonnian army are you going to run that's not going to have some form of Knights of the Realm or Peasant Bowmen or Men-at-Arms? You know, I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. To see that, I think it's quite cool. It changes up the flavour a bit, and I do think there's going to be ways that you can get around that and work into certain lists and work certain lists in the style that you like. Now, on to special. You may take Squires, Questing Knights, Pegasus Knights and Mounted Yeomen however you like, up to 50% of your army's value. So there's no cap on those, just that's the amount. You can take them, go large. Again, that's quite cool. So, it's relatively flexible, that. And then there's 0 to 2 units of Battle Pilgrims per 1,000 points. Again, the same thing. The points things is, in some places I think it's quite good, so like on characters for example. In other places I feel like it's a bit redundant. At 2,000 points I can take 4 units of Battle Pilgrims. Am I really ever going to take more than 4 units? Unless they're really, really good. But, just am I ever going to take more than 4 units? I'm not sure I would. Is it necessary? I'm not sure it is, but, it's there. So, what can you say? Now, obviously, they mention that in the article itself, it mentions, there's a lot to unpack. You can't overload your armies with powerful wizards and mighty heroes, which I think, as we've discussed on that, I think that makes sense, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. As long as your army is 25% of its core spent, and 25% of its points spent on core, and includes one of its units, then the rest of it's relatively flexible, as they say. Obviously, they mentioned the whole 2 units of 6 Growl Knights can be taken at 25%. Now, it's for me. Are you going to see 2 units of 6 potentially? It's we don't know just how the game's going to play out. Is 2 units of 6 Growl Knights going to be the most competitive choice, or is 1 unit of 10 going to be the most competitive choice? I'm not sure. Or is, as I said, 4 units of 3. Is the Growl Knight dart? Is that going to be the competitive meta? We'll have to see, but I think it's quite cool to see that you can get a good amount of models still and still feel like you're getting to field those models that you like. I know that in 8th edition you would take 1 unit of Growl Knights, it was basically your entire core, and you always really felt like you wanted 2. So, if 6 Growl Knights are going to be the equivalent effectiveness of 1 unit of 10 in 8th, with the buffs that they've received in their stat line, maybe 2 units of 6 actually will feel really punchy, really competitive. So I think the changes so far have been quite cool. I think they're, we're looking good. But let's, from there, I just want to move on to the couple of little stat lines we've been spoke about. So they have shown us the Lords of Bretonnia stat line. Now this is the Duke, the Baron and the Paladin. Obviously they are regular infantry characters on 25mm squares, as discussed here. They get given a list of options that they may take the following of. which is their option choices, is Morning Stars, Great Weapons, and Lances if they are appropriately mounted. They may take a shield, they may be mounted, and a Baron or Paladin may swap its Knight's Vow with a Questing Vow or a Growl Vow. They have to pay additional points for those. They may take a single Knightly Virtue, dependent on their level. So a Paladin can take up to 50 point Virtue, a Baron can take a 75 point Virtue, and a Duke may take a 100 point Virtue. Now, in terms of special rules, all of them have got Blessing of the Lady and Rallying Cry. But the Baron and the Paladin have the Knight's Vow, which obviously can then be upgraded, and the Duke automatically comes with the Growl Vow. So I'm going to assume that the Growl Vow is going to be the best one. Now, there's no mention there is no mention to the Knightly Virtues. They've said later in the article that they're not going to discuss them, but there are 2 whole pages of Knightly Virtues. So I think there's going to be a lot to pick from. I'm hoping that it's not 2 pages and all you ever see is the same 3 virtues. I'm hoping that all of the virtues are actually quite good, competitive, feel like they're worth taking. So there's certainly the potential there to see a lot of variation, which I'm hoping that we do. That'll be quite exciting. But I want to step back quickly to the actual stat lines themselves. So all of them are movement 4. Paladins and Barons are weapon skill 6, whilst Dukes are weapon skill 7. All of them have got ballistic skill 3. Paladins and Barons are strength 4, toughness 4. Dukes are strength 5, toughness 4. That is really good. With wounds of Paladin on 2, Baron on 3, and a Duke of wounds of 4. Now, a 4 wound Duke, weapon skill 7, strength 5. It seems like they're going to be an absolute combat beast. Initiative for Dukes and Barons are 5, Paladins are 4. Leadership for Dukes and Barons are 9, Paladins 8. And attacks for Duke, Baron, Paladin is 5, 4, 3. Respectively. So what we've got is a weapon skill 7, strength 5, initiative 5, 5 attack Duke. They seem like they're going to be absolutely the mustard. They seem like they're going to be really good. I don't think anyone's really going to. You're not really going to be wanting to throw anything into them that isn't your version of that Duke. Your probably top competitive combat character is probably the only thing that you're going to want to be putting into combat like that, in my opinion. They seem very, very good. Now, they mention below some of the specific weapon types. So, they talk about the Morning Star. Now, these obviously, the choice of weaponry are taken from a larger menu of arms in the main rulebook. So, what we're going to see is obviously in the main rulebook, all of the weapons, they're going to have their stats similar to like they used to have, obviously, in 8th edition, where you'd have great weapons were +2 strength, halberds were +1 strength, spears, all that jazz. But it looks like we're going to see a larger menu, which is quite cool. I'm quite excited about that. I'd like to see a different bit of variation. It was always one of those things for me that I'm like, miners, for example, have pickaxes. Why has the pickaxe not got really good armor piercing value? Why is it just a great weapon? But, it'd be interesting to see what type of lists, what type of weapons that we now get, whether it's just going to be 5 or 6, or whether we're going to get like a large selection of different types of weapons. But that's going to be cool. I mean, a Morning Star, it says is +1 strength, -1 AP in the first round of combat. So, similar to what a Flower used to be in 8th. Obviously, a Flower in 8th was additional strength in the first round of combat. So, this one's going to be additional strength and AP. Now, it's mentioned that a Great Weapon doubles these bonuses, but makes you strike last. So, a Great Weapon's going to be +2 strength, -2 AP, but you strike last. So, similar to what it is in 8th. Similar risk of running great weapons because everyone gets to punch you first. And then obviously it says initially that a lance adds similar bonuses, though only on the charge. No, it doesn't mention what the lance bonuses are. I'm going to assume +2 strength, +2 AP based off of the above, but that might change. I don't know that for certain. And then it also just says shields improve your save by +1. Makes sense. That's cool. Now, it talks next about Hippogriffs specifically, which Dukes or Barons can take. Now, these seem absolutely outrageous. They are a monstrous creature. They're on a 50 mil square. They have Wicked Claws, Serrated Maw, and Griffonic Pelt, which counts as heavy armour. They can have Barding for +15 points, so you can get them with heavy armour and barding for +3 to your save. That's really cool. Makes sense. That makes sense. Special rules, they've got Fly 9, Stomps D3, Swift Stride, Terror, Large Target, Counter Charge, and Close Order. So it all seems very good. They seem like a good monster by themselves, let alone what they're going to do to your characters when you put them on there. So they're fly. So let's just talk about a Duke, for example, on a Hippogriff. A Duke on a Hippogriff is going to be Strength 5, Toughness 5, with 7 wounds. I mean, that's serious. They are going to be terrifying when they're flying around. The Hippogriff attacks separately, so the Hippogriff has also got 5 attacks at weapon skill, 4 attacks at weapon skill 5 and strength 5. So you're talking about that model, you know, a Duke on Hippogriff is going to pump out 9 attacks at strength 5. And that's unless you've got any special weapons or equipment on your Duke. It just base value, 9 attacks at strength 5 is really good. 7 wounds on the Duke, +1 toughness. I mean, again, same thing. Obviously, a Baron's going to be toughness 5 with 6 wounds. You know, like they seem like they're going to be really good, really scary. And obviously, you know, they've shown off the plastic. They've shown off the plastic Duke and Baron on Pegasus. So I wonder if we're going to see a new Hippogriff model. Obviously, there was the old Luon Kerr model on metal. The metal Hippogriff for him was really nice. I'd love to see him come back as just like a Duke or a Baron on Hippogriff, because that model was lovely and you never saw it in 8th edition just because of the sheer amount of points it was. So I'm hoping that's going to be one of the returning metal models, and that's just going to be Duke or Baron on Hippogriff. I'd love to see that. But I certainly think you're definitely going to see Dukes and Barons on Hippogriffs all the time, because they're going to be absolutely outrageously good. It also goes through the stat line for Men-at-Arms, which I will brush over this one. They're a minimum unit size 10+. They are 25mm base, as we know. Weapon skill 2, strength and toughness 3, 1 attack, 1 wound apiece. Now they can take a Yeoman Champion full command. They can take a champion with full command. They may also take a Grail Monk, and the Grail Monk may be equipped with a Blessed Triptych. Now, a Grail Monk counts as a kind of secondary champion. So I wonder if he'll be able to issue and accept challenges. But the Blessed Triptych, not cryptid, Triptych, gives the whole unit stubborn. Now, it does appear that we've been given the explanation of what stubborn does. So the first time they are required to take a break test, they do not need to risk a dice roll. Instead, they fall back in good order. So that does seem to change what stubborn was. Obviously, stubborn in 8th edition is a very contentious rule. People love it or they hate it. And, you know, the change to that, I think, will be good. I think it does mean that you're not, again, it basically means that if the unit's stubborn, you're not just going to run them down in the first round of combat. But, you know, they are going to fall back in good order, so you can charge them again. But specifically, Men-at-Arms have got the Shield Wall special rule, which the Shield Wall special rule allows them to give ground instead of falling back. So, combining Stubborn and Shield Wall, I don't know how many units are going to have that, we'll have to see, but that seems like it's going to be quite a hard counter for heavy cavalry. Now, obviously, they mentioned that in the article that, you know, they're saying it will be stealing the impetus from even the heaviest of cavalry. But I do think that that's going to be a very good combo. I think you're going to be, if you've got a unit that can take that can be stubborn with Shield Wall as a combination, I think you're definitely going to want to be running that, and I think you're definitely going to see that from my initial thoughts. And yeah, I mean, really, that is the end of the article. Now, I know I've held you for quite a long time here. They talk about the Grand Army. There's a final point. They talk about the Grand Army not being the only way to select a force. Each faction will gradually gain access to Armies of Infamy, which provide often wildly different ways to muster a force. So, obviously, we mentioned Armies of Infamy earlier. They can technically, you can take Armies of Infamy, technically as allies. So it'd be cool to see what an Army of Infamy is. Now it says we're going to gradually gain access to those, so I'll assume that they'll be released slowly and surely over time supplements for each army. So I assume in the initial release, everyone will get a Grand Army composition, even the PDF ones. And then slowly but surely we'll receive supplements. And those supplements will have an Army of Infamy for each faction in it, or the faction that the supplement is based off. So that's, I think, it's probably a fair assessment. It's going to be really cool to see what Armies of Infamy are. They're obviously going to change the general composition. So I suppose then you might see only on-foot unit armies, or you might see all-mounted armies, or there might be specific, there definitely will be specific ways in which the units have to be taken. But that's a very exciting prospect. It talks about Bretonnian lords you might want to enter exile, especially as it means you can then take forbidden border princes bombards into battle, while those who really just enjoy knights and more knights may prefer an errantry crusade. So I suppose it obviously talks of the Army of Infamy being an errantry crusade or border prince bombards. Obviously we've got no idea what those are. I'd assume that an errantry crusade would be removing the cap on knights and reducing the minimum on foot units, so you can just run all mounted army. So like a bit like a classic 8th edition Bretonnian army that you would have seen. So that'd be quite interesting. But that'd be cool to see that. I'm looking forward to seeing what these Armies of Infamy are. And just to round it all off, they've specifically said there's going to be no Old World Almanac next week. At the time of release of this, next Monday is going to be Christmas Day in the UK. So there is no Old World Almanac release, but they have said that on the 26th, there is a check-in on the 26th for something of an off-white Christmas. Now, my big speculation would be from myself that is when we are potentially going to see some more information about Tomb Kings. Off-white would suggest a bone colour. So I'm really looking forward to the 26th. I'm really looking forward to seeing the Tomb Kings. I'm very excited about them as a list myself, and I very much so am looking forward to spending money on Tomb Kings when they come out, inevitably. But so I'm looking forward to next week. But for now, I've held you for far lots longer than I should have, ladies and gentlemen. But I hope you have enjoyed today's video. If you did enjoy it, please give it a like and a share. Comment down below if you agree with what I'm saying, or if you think I'm just chatting a lot of hot air. But outside of that, if you haven't yet, please head over to triplecrownwargaming.com, where you can become a Knight of the Realm. Go to our mustering ground, where you can see all of our subscription content. There's tons of videos on there and lots of fun. But for now, thanks for listening, guys.
Remember to tag your friends and like, subscribe and share. Then head over to triplecrownwargaming.com and become a Knight of the Realm today.
What are you doing, mate?
You alright? Do it for Warhammer!